Thank you for joining us. This is our open lecture. It's a panel session today, so we'll be hearing from a few panelists. We've got one panelist, Navjot, he's going to turn his camera on soon, and hopefully another panelist, Chris, will be joining us soon. I think he's just having difficulties logging on. I just firstly want to thank you all so much for joining us. Anyone who misses the lecture, it will be recorded and we'll pop it up on the website later today or tomorrow, hopefully. But without further ado, I think I'll hand straight over to Alex, who can talk to you in more detail.
Thanks, Anna. So we've got Trudy and Navjot here with us, and like Anna said, we'll be waiting on Chris to join us. But in the meantime, I'll introduce myself and a little bit about who we are at the RHN and what we do. So my name is Alexandra Rose, and I'm a principal clinical psychologist and PhD fellow working in the brain injury service at the Royal Hospital for Neuro-disability. I've been working in the field of brain injury support in some form or another since about 2004 and decided to specialize in neuropsychology after completing my clinical training in around 2014. I've also had the pleasure of working at the RHN for the last 4 years, over which time I have continually found my work with this patient group to be rewarding, stimulating, and inspiring. So a bit about the RHN. The RHN is a specialist centre for complex neurodisability. We are a charity independent from the NHS, but we work closely alongside it to provide the best possible care for people living with neurodisability. Although we have some particular specialisms, we admit people on the basis of their need for our service, rather on the cause of their brain injury. So that means that we admit people with a large range of neurological conditions, and we specialize in supporting those with severe injuries and persistent difficulties. We have a number of different services at the RHN, including rehabilitation, disorders of consciousness assessment, a challenging behaviour ward, Huntington's disease services, respiratory and ventilator wards, a young adult specialist care facility, and a specialist nursing home. So a really broad range of support for neurodisability. At the RHN Brain Injury Service, where I work and where a couple of our patients today, or recovered patients, I should say, spent their time. That is a specific assessment and rehabilitation service for those who've had an acquired brain injury. So that could be caused by a stroke or some form of a traumatic injury. We are an interdisciplinary team, including doctors, psychologists, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, speech and language therapists, and music therapists, as well as dietitians. We've got a Compass team that has a look at specialized computerized communication tools. And we have our really experienced and passionate nursing and healthcare assistant team as well. We all work together as an interdisciplinary team in the rehabilitation program, in that we are all involved to ensure that the patient achieves their personalized goals. We aim for our rehabilitation goals to be based on each person's values to ensure that they are meaningful and motivating. We work to strengthen the abilities and the confidence of each person who comes to stay with us, with the aim of maximizing ability and comfort and restoring as much independence as is possible in order for them to lead a fulfilling life. As a member of the interdisciplinary team, I have the honor of being involved in patients' recoveries and helping them to reach their rehabilitation goals. And I'm really excited today to hear a bit more about the experience of people who have gone through the rehabilitation services as a patient and recovered. So we'll start with Trudy. So Dr. Trudy Kemp was a rehabilitation patient on Draper's ward a while ago now, and she made phenomenal progress and has actually since returned to the RHN as a staff member. So I'll hand it over to you, Trudy.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My story began in December 2015. I'd had a completely, totally normal day at work. I was working at King's College Hospital in the NHS. I can remember the evening, it was work had finished and the chief exec was having a leaving party, and I can remember being at the party surrounded by nurses and neurosurgeons with a plate of nibbles in one hand and a glass of wine in the other hand. I'm told, and I have no memory of this at all, that I gave my glass of wine to somebody else, and anybody that knows me well would have known that something at this point was seriously wrong. I then walked over to Roland, whose party it was, and said, "I'm really sorry, I don't feel very well." Collapsed in a heap at his feet and then had a fit. And one of our more astute neurosurgeons was heard to say, "I think there is something going on inside her head." No shit, Sherlock. sorry, excuse me. Within 5 minutes, I was in the CT scanner because this party was being held on the premises at King's. So if you're going to do this, do it surrounded by nurses, neurosurgeons, and 5 minutes from a casualty department. I very quickly became unconscious. I was ventilated and then CT scanned, and I had a grade 4, which is quite a severe, big subarachnoid hemorrhage, totally out of the blue. I was the next morning I had a kind of intravenous up from the groin procedure to stop the bleeding, and I then spent the next 4 months on intensive care, mostly at King's, but then partly at George's, which is much nearer to where I live. The first thing I can remember is waking up in the ambulance, being transferred from St George's to the RHN, and that was at the end of March, so that was after 4 months. And I can remember lying in the back of the ambulance on a stretcher with a red plastic cushion, terrified I was going to fall off. And every time I went round a corner, I had to hold on like mad. And then I came into the RHN. I didn't know it at the time, but I now know that I was still in reduced consciousness. I didn't know that. I'm not sure what difference it makes, but that was part of the reason why I came to the RHN, because I hadn't properly woken up. I then had the most incredibly intensive, stimulating, exhausting program of rehab covering OT, physio, speech therapy, psychology, music and art. And after 6 months of the RHN, I walked out on my own steam. So I always say that King's saved my life, but the RHN gave me my life back. And I am really, really pleased and very happy to be now working at the RHN. I think it's a great hospital and a fabulous place to work. So,
thanks, Judy. I quite liked how you described the program there as exhaustive and exhausting. So it's quite apt. I wonder if you can say a bit more about that, it being exhausting. How much did you have to do? What were they expecting of you?
So, I mean, I had to learn how to walk, talk, feed myself, go to the loo, dress myself, wash myself, absolutely everything. I kind of thought I knew how to do those things, but it turned out that I really didn't. Or it turned out that I no longer knew how to go. So the brain injury that I had there are two components. One is the damage done to the brain and what effect that has on your body's ability to work and your brain's ability to think. The second thing is a period of intensive care, has all sorts of consequences directly of that. So I had a tracheostomy, you can probably see. I was peg fed, and what starts to happen is if you have a long period of intensive care, you're not doing anything, so all your muscles melt away. And the other thing that starts to happen is that contractures start to form. You've probably seen some of the postures of some people with serious brain injuries when their elbows and wrists are flexed. So if you're in intensive care for a long time, what they do is they put splints on you to try and stop that happening. And then the physios have to work really hard on you afterwards to try and help that happen, as well as building up the strengths of your muscles.
And so a lot of the things that would be really easy for somebody without a brain injury, it sounds like were really difficult and tiring for you.
Yeah, really, really. And I found that I was knackered by sort of the middle of the afternoon. I'm a kind of owl, so I don't like starting early, or I wasn't, and I quite like staying up late. But by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was absolutely knackered.
And what is it like coming back to the RHN as a staff member?
So I worked for the NHS for about 30 years. You can tell by looking at me that I'm well into. So I was 52 when this happened. I'm now 58. 30 years working at NHS. Worked. It's the most incredibly supportive and lovely place to work, I find, and has been very supportive of me as an ex-patient. I'm not the only ex-patient on reception team. That one other person that I work with was an ex-patient here too, and another of our members has also had a brain injury. So I think the RHN has been fantastically, so it's the whole rehab package. You learn how to walk, you learn how to talk, you learn how to dress, you learn how to feed yourself, you learn how to wash yourself, and then they give you a job.
I mean, definitely hear your passion. And so you're based on reception now, is that right,
Yes,
Trudy?
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
What does your day at the RHN entail now that you're working there?
I work 3 afternoons a week, and obviously it's all completely changed in the pandemic. So before the pandemic, the RHN was always a kind of activity, relatives coming in, people coming to meetings, people coming for courses, and patients moving around the place doing activities. The pandemic stopped all of that in the way that it normally happened before, and it's starting to, so the RHN in lockdown was kind of eerie and quiet, which it isn't normally. But the RHN, I think, dealt with the pandemic fantastically well. And yes, we had some tragic stories, both of patients and a couple of members of staff we lost too. So it's been an incredibly difficult time, but now starting to get back to normal.
Yeah, I would agree. It's starting to feel a bit more normal and a bit more hustle and bustle.
Yeah, which is what it was always like.
Yeah. And I wonder, you're in a unique position as the sort of first person that people come across when they walk through the doors in the RHN. Do you ever find yourself giving some advice or encouraging words to families or patients?
I do. I try not to do it very much or push it down people's throats. But I do get chatting to relatives, and particularly people who've just been admitted. I will often have a brief chat a relative and say, I was a patient here and now I'm here. So that isn't going to be the outcome for everybody, but great things can happen, and can happen because of here.
And that can be quite motivating. I know a lot of my patients have mentioned Trudy on the front desk, so that's why I asked the question. Trudy, is there anything else that you'd like to chat about or tell people about?
So I guess, I mean, a huge amount of the therapy that we get in the RHN is funded by the NHS, and you would get anywhere that you were. So physio, OT, psychology, speech therapy. The extra bits that come through the charity, the art and the music, were incredibly important to me. And actually, I'm still doing stuff to do with that now. So I think I'm still getting better 5 years on. I can't tell anymore because it's incredibly incremental and very gradual. I can't tell anymore, but people who don't see me very often can still tell that they think I'm talking better and moving better than I did. I'm absolutely not exactly the same as I used to be, and getting your head around that is quite hard.
Yeah. It's still quite motivating if you're still noticing changes sort of 6 years on.
Yes, I mean, I don't notice them, but other people do.
Well, it's excellent to hear. Thanks, Trudy. I really enjoyed listening to that. What we'll do is we'll go through chatting, hearing from all of our panelists, and at the end we'll go through any questions and we'll address them. Anna will probably read out the questions and direct them to who they're for.
Yeah, I'll do that. So
I had the pleasure of working directly with our next panelist. He was a patient in the RHN in 2019, Mr. Navjot Deo. So he and I worked together on quite a few goals. Draper's ward had recently been refurbished, so he was one of our first patients on our new snazzy ward. So I'm looking forward to hearing how he's doing. Hi, Nav, how are you doing?
Oh, you okay?
Yeah. Well, it's nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too. I'm not doing too good because I started having seizures, and then with every seizure, I just I just get worse, and then
Sorry to
I
hear that.
love medicine, and then it makes me very sleepy.
All right, so that's why we've said that I'll ask you some questions so that I take some of the pressure off of you today.
Yeah.
That sound all right?
Yeah.
So do you want to maybe just speak a bit about what happened to you in the very beginning of what happened and caused your brain injury?
I just collapsed, and at about 9 o'clock, and then my wife was at work, and then she found me after 9 hours, and due to a ruptured AVM, and I stayed in ICU for like 5 or 6 weeks and had 4 brain surgeries, and I have to do everything again, speaking, walking, talking, swallowing, everything at the age of 29. So I have severe anxiety, and when I'm stressed, I forget words.
And this is a little bit of a stressful situation. I get it. So you had quite a severe brain bleed, and like you said, you were home alone at the time.
Yeah.
And then you had quite a few seizures as well before you went to the hospital, which is a little bit, maybe we'll get to what's happening with you now in a little bit. Do you remember much about coming to the RHN, Nav?
Yes.
What do you remember?
First thing I remember that this doctor, I don't remember the name of the doctor, she said that she came to assess me, but I was not speaking and then writing everything. So they transferred me to RHN, and then first ward is Orlando's ward, my friend Orlando. So I remember that one.
How did your wife feel about that was your first word, your friend's name?
Yeah.
And then you stayed with us. So all of our rehab is based on goals. So if you're doing really well with your goals, we tend to extend your stay. And the most you can stay is sort of 6 months. And you stayed the whole time because you were doing so well.
Yeah.
Do you remember the goals that you were working on?
No.
No? So one of them was this, Nav. You were working on being able to speak to other people about what had happened to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, 2
Way,
years later, we've achieved a goal.
Yeah. And my biggest goal was walking out of hospital. So, because it's like so much damage, and then my whole side was so weak, and then therapist just assessed that there is no way I'm gonna walk out of hospital. But I got movement in my left hand as well. But every day I woke up and then I try hard and work harder on my speaking and everything. So that's it.
Yeah, you were really motivated to work on your goals.
Yeah.
How is the walking going now?
Walking is slow, but I wear Fitbit and usually walk at least 15,000 steps a day.
I mean,
But
that's impressive. I think we should share that, you couldn't stand up from your chair when you arrived at the RHN.
I was in a red rota stand, just cannot stand up properly. Used to sling in and out of bed, but I just did that.
Yeah. You progressed quite quickly. I'm proud to hear of the 15,000 steps.
Yeah.
And what do you think what is it that motivates you to keep going and keep progressing?
It's like what happened to me should not happen in the first place, because I'm not a bad man. So I just need to work hard to get better. So I have to say, like 6 months time period of recovery, therapist talk is just it's just wrong. So I'm progressing even after 2 years.
Yeah.
I can see improvements, definite improvements. with the, on app with quiz.
Mm-hmm.
So my memory is getting better.
That's really good to hear. I think that's something that we notice is that people continue to progress. And Trudy mentioned it earlier. Now you're saying the same thing, that, you know, even after leaving rehab, there's still progression, there's still improvements.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to somebody in a similar situation that you were in, Nav?
Just forget the past. Look the future, because you can change the future with hard work and motivation.
I think that's a really good message.
Yeah.
How are you spending your time these days? I know that we're all in a pandemic and a lot of us have been stuck in the house.
Yeah. Last week we moved to Berlin. So I'm in Berlin now because universities are free here and I'm planning to study something.
Well, that's really exciting to hear, Nav. That's
Yeah.
a really big change for you guys.
Yeah. I just do German on Duolingo. It's not perfect, but I'm getting there slowly. So it's like I need to study something because I know that it takes like 2 years to get better. So why not do something constructive?
Yeah, I mean, learning a language is a really good way to sort of exercise your brain and build it up.
Yeah.
Now, is there anything else you want to tell everybody listening about your experience and your recovery?
Yeah, RHN is such a nice place, and it don't feel like hospital. It's like pools and therapy, music classes, and they got even a pet cat, library, and good food. Very nice therapists. I recovered only because of RHN. So I strongly believe even if I could have just gone to other rehab hospital, I could not have been here.
Oh,
So
that's really lovely.
Yeah.
You're quite right. I forgot to mention the hospital cat. We have a hospital cat. Often a lot of therapy can be involved in feeding a cat, caring for a cat, trying to find the cat. It was really nice to hear how well you're doing, Nav.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear about the medication changes and things. Hopefully that stabilizes.
Yeah. And because of that, I just feel zoned out and it's really hard to concentrate.
Yeah.
There's so much medicine on my brain. When I woke up, I am clear, no problem. But when I take medicine, it's just going downhill. It feels like I'm drunk.
Yeah. I'm sure that sometimes it can take time to get the medications right for the seizures. You need a balance between feeling a little bit sleepy and not having seizures anymore. So I hope they get that right soon.
Yeah, I hope so as well.
Okay. Thanks, Nav. We'll leave questions and answers till the end, so you can have a bit of a break, and then Anna will let us know if there's any particular questions that maybe you can answer at the end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex Rose. I remember your name.
Thanks, Nav. So our final panelist was not an RHN patient, but he has come to speak to us before about his experience after his brain injury. So Mr. Christopher Yeo suffered a traumatic brain injury in a road cycling accident, and since then has gone on to write a book about his experience. And I had the pleasure of reading and reviewing that book. And I quite enjoyed the way that he described his experience. It was a really unique, patient-centered way of looking at being in hospital and what it's like to go through rehab, and what he called the adventure of recovering from his brain injury. So I'll hand over to you, Chris.
Thanks for that, Alex, and that very nice introduction. Thank you to the staff at RHN for inviting me to speak. So my connection to the RHN is that one of the physiotherapists who is now at the RHN was instrumental to my recovery. So first, let me talk a bit about what happened to me, and apologies that I'm not as eloquent as the other speakers who have gone before. So what happened to me? In 2013, I was involved in a road cycling accident while I was cycling in France. I cannot remember what happened because I have a 6-month gap in my life, my memories. So I suffered from both retrograde and anterior grade amnesia. The issue with my bicycle crash was, although sometimes people in a bicycle crash and they fairly quickly recover, the problem was that I tried to brake with my face, which is something which is as painful as it sounds. As a result of this impact, I acquired a catalog of injuries. I suffered from fractures of the right zygoma, maxilla and zygoma, lateral wall of the right orbit, and fourth nerve palsy into the right eye. I had severe grade 3 diffuse axonal injury. I had a Glasgow coma scale score of 8 out of 15, a coma for 8 days, and post-traumatic amnesia for 4 weeks. I was initially treated for 3 weeks in intensive care at a French public hospital in Bisacon. After that, I was flown over by air ambulance over to London to the Wellington hospital, where I had facial reconstruction by insertion of a titanium frame onto my right side of my face, surgery on my eye to try and correct the damage there. However, the major problem I had was the diffuse axonal injury. And as Trudy has mentioned quickly, there are a number of deficits that occur from this. For me, it was firstly disorientation in time and space. I didn't know where I was or what date it was. I had problem with incontinence. I had inability to swallow. I had severe word finding difficulties. I had an inability to mobilize independently, so I had to relearn to walk just like Trudy. I had quite severe fatigue problems, memory, and also I lacked emotional control. So my treatment at the Wellington Hospital was neuropsychology, psychology, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, and physiotherapy. And this went on for, I had 5 weeks of treatment at the Wellington Hospital. This was then followed by a further 6 months of outpatient treatment in several different hospitals. I was treated at the National Hospital of Neurology and Neuroscience, the Royal London Hospital, Mount End Hospital, and the Oliver Zangwill Center. Treatment consisted of psychology, neuropsychology, vestibular physiotherapy, endocrinology, speech and language therapy, and occupational therapy. So after the first year, most of these physical problems have been dealt with. However, residual and troubling mental and emotional deficits remain. So after my 1 year post-injury, I still suffered from quite significant ongoing mental deficits, being memory, processing speed, emotional control, fatigue, and lack of confidence. But at this point, so 1 year post-injury, most of my regular treatment had stopped. So I had to deal with these residual deficits myself. As for me, after sitting back and trying to think about how I could recover from these problems, I realized that the thing which was holding me back from recovery was my difficulty accepting my new self. I could not understand why things were different now, why some things were so difficult, why I would fail at seemingly basic tasks. I then also felt that everything I'd done before, my striving, my sweating, my pain, was undone in an instant by the crash. So against such a backdrop, I quickly descended into secondary depression, as I thought that had I done something to deserve this? Had I not done something to deserve this? Was this all a cosmetic joke? So I went through several stages to try and deal with my grief over the death of my former self. Firstly, there was denial that anything was wrong with me. Once I managed to get past that, I became a very angry person. I was angry that this has happened to me and that no one else is affected and that the world just didn't care what was going on. Moving past this, I then moved to the stage of bargaining, trying to come up with this trade in my mind that if I was just able to do this one thing, if I could only walk, if I could only remember the last 5 minutes, I would give everything for that. Then I moved into the stage of depression, that although I was trying to do everything I could, it just wasn't really having much effect. Finally, I arrived at the stage of acceptance where I realized that things were not going to get better, but I had my own life to live. The world did not care about my suffering. It was up to me to make myself better. So through this development of awareness and acceptance, I came to realize that it was really up to me how much I wanted to recover. It didn't matter about what the therapists were thinking, about what my family was thinking. It was all dependent on me. So having come to this self-awareness, I think this is when things became to pick up in my recovery. So trying to get over this apathy, I tried to reason my way out of this problem to regain a bit more of emotional control. I had to try and look through to maybe looking at a different way of addressing my injury rather than a crash, an accident or such. So what I started off with was I referred to my bicycle crash as the accident, as if no one was to blame and it was all unfair, but no one was involved. But that didn't really seem to help me move on either. And next, I tried to refer to it as the crash. So try to be something less emotional. However, that didn't really work either because it still implied that somehow I was to blame. And I was trying to take away emotions, but try and sweep it under the carpet. Then I moved on to trying to view what happened to me as the incident. So another attempt to decouple my emotions from what had happened to me. But that did not work either because it swung to the other extreme. I was too dispassionate, and it might imply that, you know what, sometimes maybe I was a bit to blame. It was as if to use an analogy, as if if I had been driving a car and had a car crash, it was kind of my fault because I had 1 pint before I drive, so my reactions weren't that fast. But even though I got hit, I might have been hit by a truck which was driving on the wrong side of the road. But what I found from going through all these, none of these different types of words or different ways of trying to address what happened to me helped me move on. Instead, I'm at the final stage, I moved to describing what happened to me as an adventure. So it's accepting what happened to me, accepting that I was right to feel emotion on it, I was right to be angry, to be sad, but this was my chance to try again. From a different perspective, difficulties become opportunities to overcome. So once I reached this stage, things began to progress. So as for how I tried to deal with my brain injury, after I was discharged out of hospital and all my treatment, I tried to run a very structured day. So to have a very set routine, do A, B, C, have it written and planned out beforehand to try and reduce the load on my brain. I'd also write down as much as I could of when I was talking to people, of tasks I needed to do, so I wouldn't have to use my mental energy to try and remember what had happened. I would also try to proactively plan in the future to avoid possible problems, such as if something happened, I would know what I had already decided I would do if that scenario occurred. So through this type of exercise of reframing my brain injury, I tried to learn to look forward and not moan about the past, because I saw that as counterproductive. It did not help me at all. As is the future which matters, to try and become a better person and not bitter. So I then also, after all of this, I actually started my return to work. So I actually work as a solicitor in financial services in the UK. So supported by my work's occupational health, I started a graded return to work over 18 months. And it went fairly well. It had a few up and downs where they had to carefully monitor my recovery, not too fast, not too slow, but after a while, it actually came back fairly well, and I was returned back to my full-time job. But then, after a few years, I thought, well, life is a bit boring where I was. So why don't I give myself another challenge, which is change to a different company, and in this new company, see if anyone realizes what happened to me at all, because that would be the ultimate test. So in my new workplace, which I've been at for over 3 years now, no one knows what's happened to me unless I tell them. I wouldn't have to pretend to be normal because I actually am. And so through this, the one message I would like to say is brain injury really is what you make of it. It's up to you to decide how far you recover. You have, as this brain injury survivor, you have complete freedom to narrate how the world sees you, and you can take your own different perspective on brain injury. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Chris. I know that you and I have discussed this before, but you had quite a lot of insights, and we know that we often get these questions at these talks about sort of what it was like for therapists telling you what to do. And I think you went through a stage of being quite difficult to engage, and you didn't really want to do things. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that was like, and if you have any advice for different ways that therapists might have tried things.
Good question, Alex. So yes, and I've also seen this in some of the group therapy which I participated in when I was still recovering, that some of the patients were just very apathetic to what was going on. They just couldn't be bothered to recover, and the various therapists would try to cajole them into taking certain actions, such as, oh, why don't you try walking this distance without holding on to anything? Why don't you try lifting your leg? Why don't you try speaking to me? Why don't you try making a short speech, like 1 or 2 minutes? It is very difficult to try and break through this apathy. In terms of what therapists can do for it, I think you try everything you can. You can try and explain logically how things can be better if they do certain things. You can try and appeal to an emotional state and say, well, do you want to be like that for the rest of your life? Which is actually something which the physiotherapist at the Royal RHN actually tried. She said, do you want to be like this all the time? Do you want to stay in hospital all the time? Basically, do you want to be someone who will be dependent on other people, or do you want to put your life back on track? So you can also appeal to someone's pride to get over that. Now, you can't really, it's very difficult. You can't really force someone to have this type of self-awareness. It's something which they have to discover themselves. You can explain it to them, but then I know that it can take years and years and nothing will happen. So you could try and speak to their friends and family, try and deal with this, or have them meet other survivors, which is very useful, I find, because when you meet other survivors, you can, as a survivor myself, you can see yourself in like some of the difficulties which they're having, and you think, I have that problem too. Am I actually really like that? So that helps a lot with self-awareness.
There's no one size fits all, but sort of trying to see what works for everybody. And I do agree. I think meeting people who've gone through something similar, or even reading about somebody else's experience is very helpful. I know that I've given your book to a couple of my patients before to sort of inspire them that this is something that you can, with a shift in mindset, if you're able to do it, you could definitely push yourself a bit more. Right. So I think we're about on time to see if there's any questions that the audience wanted answered.
Thank you. So if anyone's got any questions, do you just type them in the Q&A button? It's probably at the bottom of your screen, or it might be on the right-hand side, and we'll try and get you through. We'll try and get through them all. So firstly, I want to start with, it's a question for Trudy. It's from Jess, who says, as a trainee art therapist, I'm curious to know what your experience, Trudy, of art therapy was. You mentioned, do you still do art therapy, and do you still do it at the RHN, or do you do it in your own time?
I don't do any formal art therapy. I did a fair bit when I was a patient at the RHN, and I found it hugely helpful, both for kind of concentration and manual dexterity. Those things were kind of important, and I struggled and still struggle a little bit with both of those. So there is no formal art therapy. So everything I do is either I organise myself, or so I do a little bit of, I try to make because I'm really not very good at writing and drawing anymore, never really was. I try and make myself do something each day. So I have music lessons. I did music when I was growing up, so I pay for my own music lessons, and I think that's probably the most important one for me. The other thing that I do is I swim a lot. It's one of my favourite bits when I was in the RHN was using the little swimming pool when it was open, and I still swim. So I remember one of the physios said to me, "I've never had anybody both leaving here both walking and swimming before."
Oh, wow. And would you say, you sort of touched on it, obviously we're an interdisciplinary team, so we do have lots of teams that all form part of the rehab process. Would you say there's one in particular that really helped you?
I mean, I guess, helping you is two. One is the kind of practicality stuff, and clearly walking, and so physio and OT really important. And for me, because I talk a lot, as you can probably tell, speech therapy was important as well. But music therapy, art therapy, and interestingly, the psychology was too.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm being distracted. My hubby's just walked into the kitchen.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. I think maybe, Navjit, if I can ask you the same question. Obviously, we've got lots of therapy services at the RHN. Is there one that you particularly enjoyed, or that you found particularly helped you on your road to recovery?
Yes, I enjoyed physiotherapy and the therapy with my arm. So my goal is to use all the therapies so that I don't feel lonely. I was doing art therapy, music therapy, and physiotherapy, and the one with the computer games, Compass, just library, everything. Just so after that, my wife comes, so just had a nice time. So I don't feel lonely in there. All the therapies. So I woke up and then I see the board, and then this like in a school.
And are there any that you've carried on at home that you do on your own?
Yes, exercises and a little bit writing and music therapy and crosswords and speech therapy and everything.
So quite a lot.
It's not the same like in home, but you just create the same environment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Christopher, maybe I could ask you the same question. Obviously, you weren't rehabilitated at the RHN, but in your experience, what did you find particularly helpful, and what have you carried on doing maybe at home?
So what I found particularly helpful in my treatment, very much towards the middle and the end of my treatment in hospital, when I was able to be alert for more than 2 hours, so a more useful amount of time, was neuropsychology and psychology to understand why things were happening, such as, right, this is a problem, you can't remember how to do this after 5 minutes, you can't remember what I just said, how do we plan around this? And so that type of practical practical way of explaining how you deal with deficits and how you can plan around them, how you can recover, because your memory may not recover, but you can you can do things which will alleviate the strain on your memory and make sure that actually no one actually realizes what you're doing. They don't know you have a memory gap because you're able to compensate for it so well.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe I'm going to ask a question more about the transition from hospital to home or rehab unit to home. So Chris, maybe I'll start with you. How did you personally find the transition from leaving and starting at home?
Well, the transition, it was, so I was inpatient at Wellington Hospital until they got tired of me and told me to leave. Then I returned to my home in London, and I continued to have treatment as an outpatient at the Wellington Hospital, as well as a few of the other NHS hospitals around London. It is difficult to adapt to, first of all, looking after yourself at home. I was lucky that my family was around. In particular, one interesting issue was actually getting to my treatments. The commuting to the various hospitals or appointments can put quite a bit of strain on someone who's readjusting to life after brain injury. So much so that actually towards the end of my stay in the Wellington Hospital, they tested me to see if I could get around. So they gave me some money and they said, get to this spot, I will meet you there. And they just waited to see if I would actually make it there. What I actually found out later was there was someone following me the whole time to see if I actually, ran across the road and just got hit by a bus, then they would deal with that. But just by doing this like very minor thing, that fatigued me a lot, and I realized that being discharged and then having this type of treatment plan about, you're going to come into hospital 3 times a week is very helpful to have this type of structured plan in order that you can try and build your stamina. Because I think one of the major issues with brain injury is that there's a very severe fatigue issue, at least at the start, which can only slowly build up through repetition.
Is there anything, just out of interest, that you would have changed?
If I could go back and talk to myself, let's say a month after my accident, or just see myself, I would actually just smack myself on the head. I would say, get over yourself, realize that your life, this is your life now. You need to drive your own recovery. You can't depend on your family, your therapist, your pet dog. No one else, although they may have your best interest at heart, it's up to you to make the best of your life. So I would have tried to accelerate the acceptance and a self-recognition of what had happened, the self-awareness point.
Yeah, thank you. Trudy, if I could throw that question to you as well, how did you find the transition from the RHN to going back home?
So I had a few weekends at home the last sort of 5 or 6 weeks that I was an inpatient, and being able to come home and spend time with my family and time in the house, because I thought the house would just work exactly as it did before and I would work in the same way. When I left in that period, we didn't really know whether I was going to be a wheelchair user or not a wheelchair user all the time. So, and my house is about the most un-wheelchair friendly house in the world. It's on about 3 floors and the stairs and different levels absolutely everywhere. So the community OTs came in and put some banisters up my stairs and a few handles and stuff around the place. So it kind of looked like a kind of nursing home for a while. By the time I came home, I did bring a wheelchair back with me, but rarely used it, and made a point of rarely using it. But being able to come home for weekends before actually being discharged was really important.
Yes. And looking back, during your transition, is there anything that you would have changed?
I would have liked to have left about 3 weeks earlier than I actually did.
Okay, yeah.
But I can remember I was awful to my hubby, was completely brilliant. I was absolutely awful because he used to drive me back to the RHN on a Sunday night at the end of the weekend, and he used to sit in the car going up Parkside and Wimbledon and go, please, 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 don't make me go back, don't make me go back, don't make me go back, oh please don't make me go back. And this was just typical of him. This is 3 weeks, and actually rehab is forever. So this is another 3 weeks, and rehab is forever. So squeeze every last pip out of the RHN that you can.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So he was right. I didn't like it at the time, but he was right.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Navjot, if I can ask you the same question, how did you find your transition from leaving the RHN and going back home again? Oh, hang on, you're just on mute. I'll see if I can unmute you. There you go.
Right. At first it was a shock, but you like the freedom, and you can cook whatever you want, watch TV, talk with your wife, and then exercise as much as possible, and then walk a long way. So in hospital, you do everything in controlled environment and with health and safety, and you don't do that. You don't go there. So I really like the freedom at first. So I can walk whenever I want and don't use the stick. So if just I remember Lisa tells me, no, you don't have to, you don't use the stick, you will fall. But I just slowly started walking without stick, which improves my balance. So I like the freedom.
No, that's good. And is there anything that you would have changed about your transition, or there may not be anything?
I think I did everything in my, I just worked really hard on the rehabilitation, that's it. I'm happy where I am.
Wonderful. And can I ask you another question? Going back to your experience actually in rehab, how did you find day-to-day life on a rehab ward?
It was nice, kind of nice. You just have the routine. This time you have breakfast, and that time you see the board, and then these are the sessions or rehabs, and I really like it. It's like back to school.
So you liked the structure and the food. You said you like the food.
Yeah, I like the food as well.
Good. Christopher, can I ask you, how did you find day-to-day life on a rehab ward?
I actually did not like it that much. And the reason being is, although you may be in your room or such, there's lots of other patients around, and sometimes they don't like to keep quiet. So it can lead to quite a noisy environment or various alarms going off. Or I remember towards the start, when I first came to Wellington Hospital, I'll be woken up, I think every 2 or 3 hours to take my blood and just keep on checking me. And that was extremely tiring and irritating. So I did not have such a positive story as Navjot, but I know it was necessary, and you need someone to watch out for you to make sure you don't do something stupid like run off into the wild and get lost.
Yeah, of course. And Trudy, what about you? How did you find day-to-day life on a rehab ward?
I was in a 4-bedded bay, so that meant there were 4 of us in there, and it depended on who your roommates were as to what it was like. I spent quite a long time with one particular roommate who was diagonally opposite me, who used to make racket all night, absolutely all night, and I found that really, really difficult. There were a couple of others that I got on with really well. I quite liked the structure of it. The other thing that I discovered fairly quickly is that if you want to do rehab properly, you have to break the rules, because you need to be pushing at the boundaries. So I'm told after I left that I was on an incident form quite a lot, because I was always doing something I shouldn't be doing, whether it was going by myself to the loo or something that I shouldn't be doing, because I wasn't supposed to be quite ready for it. I never hurt myself, I never fell. And I used to get taken out by a couple of friends of mine quite a lot. We used to go up to the Green Man pub. They used to wheel me in my wheelchair up to the Green Man pub. That was really important to me, because it was kind of normal life. And that really, really mattered. But I was on an incident form all the time.
I think there's no bad thing about breaking the rules. If it helps with your recovery, that sounds great to me.
I mean, there's a fine line, isn't there, between keeping safe and pushing the boundaries of your rehab. And sometimes you have to cross them. And I think that the RHN kind of got their heads around that in the end, although I think there were a few little battles.
I'm sure there were, yeah. So maybe Trudy, because I've got you, we've got an anonymous question just to all the panelists. You've all praised the therapists' input into your recovery. How much do you think that family support is key in achieving your goals and outcomes?
What, your own family?
Yeah, your own family and your friends, of course, as well.
Enormously important. I mean, I'm very fortunate in that I've got a stable family who were able to visit. I mean, I have no idea what it would have been like in the pandemic when no visitors allowed. I would have been awful, because I had visitors almost all day, every day. And that was mattered most to me. I have no idea how I would have been during COVID. I think I would have been awful. So for me, it was enormously important, both during
Oh, I think we lost you a little bit there, Trudy. But anyway, thank you. I'll move on to Navjit, if that's all right. How do you think, how key do you think family support is in achieving your goals and outcomes?
Yeah, I think it's really important. My wife always visited me 1 year in hospital, which motivated me really good. So she says that you will get better and you will stand and talk to me one day, no matter what, and which really helped me. Yeah. If it's not for my wife, I would not have been here.
Yeah, me too.
That's wonderful to hear. And Christopher, what about you?
I think family is very important, especially in the early days, because you do not have self-awareness about what's happening to you. You don't see what's going on. You don't see what other people are saying about you. You can't make an objective decision about whether the treatment is fast, too slow, how's it going, how is it compared to what you think is going on. So having someone who has that more objective view to look in on the fishbowl is extremely important, and especially when they have your best interest in heart, because family is really you don't get another one. So, and that's what you're going for.
Thank you. Now, unfortunately, it's 2 o'clock. We've run out of time. We have got a few more questions. If anyone has had a question that's not been answered and they would like an answer, do just email in to us. We're happy to stay in touch. I just personally want to thank Alex and all of our panelists, Trudy, Navjit, Christopher. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. It's been fascinating and a privilege to hear each of your stories. Like I said at the beginning, this lecture's been recorded, so we'll put it up online. So if you know anyone else who might be interested, who's missed it, please just let them know. And we run lectures like this every month, so do just have a little look and join us again. But thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.